Well, here we are, episode number 3 already. I guess that's what happens when you're bored and you're stuck at home and you can't do much. It gives you time, of course, to reflect, to do things you might have not done normally. You know, we all complain about not having enough time in the day. Well, now we all have time, so my suggestion is get out there and do what you love, because there's never the perfect time. You know, I've always wanted to do this podcast, and my man Dimitri finally came to me. Unfortunately, you know, he was affected by all of the layoffs that happened. He's in the production industry, and next thing you know, here we are, CrabCast episode number 3 already. So let's get right into it. Today I have a very dear friend of mine, a great entrepreneur, the only person that I've ever worked for, not including my own father. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dan McDevitt to the show. Dan is the owner and founder of MCW. It's a local wrestling promotion. Started off as Maryland Championship Wrestling, respected across the country, now known strictly as MCW because of their national reach and some of the accolades they've been able to accomplish in such a short period of time. So let's get right into it. Dan, welcome to the show. Welcome to the CrabCast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here, John.
So obviously, we have to talk about this. Corona, without a doubt, has affected your industry in a major way. Of course, wrestlers are, for the most part, independent contractors. Mm-hmm. And right now, all these men and women are completely out of work. They have no income. Just take us right into how difficult it is for the local, what's known as, and you can explain this to everybody listening, independent wrestlers.
Well, I mean, independent wrestlers and promotions, I mean, because us as a promotion, I mean, we're completely put out of business. Not out of business. We're not going to go out of business, but we're completely shut down. From a business standpoint, we have our pro wrestling school, the training center, the MCW Training Center. We do birthday parties, and which has been a big thing for us because it's unique and there's
I don't want to cut you off, but let me vouch for those birthday parties for everybody listening right now. A lot of you are watching through the Jimmy's Facebook page, and while we obviously would love for you to have your birthday parties at Jimmy's Famous Seafood, if you have a child between the ages of, I'd say, 4 and 12,
4 to 12 or 13,
there is nothing, especially for the money, like an MCW birthday party. So before we get back into the effect Corona's having on the industry, walk us through an average birthday party and price, because the price is out of this world at the MCW Training Center.
So the birthday parties, it is completely unique if they're a wrestling fan. I mean, essentially, it's, we have multiple rings in our facility, the training center, and we basically, it's like a Chuck E. Cheese or something like that, a birthday party, but the kids we get them in the ring, the birthday party, and kind of they put together a little match with them, and the birthday child gets to kind of perform in front of their friends. And
full storyline.
Yeah.
You have the good guys, you have the bad guys, and of course the birthday boy or the birthday girl comes in early, gets to work with the wrestlers, on 3 moves they're going to hit in front of all their friends.
Their favorite moves.
They pick a walkout song, right?
Yeah, we do the whole lot. We do it up for them, yeah.
And food's provided.
Well, food's actually, they got to do it because that for, Harford County where we're at, they got to order their pizzas, but we got a couple hookups with local pizza shops that give good deals. So they order them and they deliver them right there, but we can set up the tables. We just can't serve the food. You know what I mean?
And this goes for about 2 hours, right?
About 2 hours, yeah.
And what's it cost?
About $400.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So,
yeah, hey man, I had my daughters at one of those I can't think of the where they jump on all the mats, like Sky Zone or one of those, man, and that was her 9th birthday, man. I walked out of there like $800 almost for like 12 of her friends.
They'll get you
$800. So it was like right just over $800. So yeah, I mean, absolutely for the price, I don't think you can touch it.
And, big businesses, they like to tug on the heartstrings of parents and pull every penny they can out.
Oh yeah, it was a hell of a gimmick because it was everything they were getting me for, and shirts and socks I had to buy for. You know what I mean? It was like. So it was a lot of the little extras. But
So back to the effect Corona's having.
so it's birthday parties, the school, and shows for us as a company. Like our three sources of revenue, and like all of them are obviously shut down. I mean, we can't have the school. We can't have the school open. Guys in there, we're much classified like a gym. And the birthday parties, obviously, with groups of people, and shows, obviously, as well. So we're kind of on pause, and it's really nothing we can do. So all from a local promotion, and me and Dennis, who's my partner, we've kind of always ran safe because we developed a couple streams of revenue. It's like kind of not a lot of other independent promotions have that. A lot of them maybe only have shows. So even still, we thought we were always safe because we always had three sources of revenue, streams of revenue coming in for the company. So we kind of small business, but we operated it pretty safe. And then this happened, something that's never happened. It's like, man, we're totally shut down. So
you had to cancel how many shows?
8.
And you run shows from Virginia to Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, and Virginia we had, we do Delaware. We can do Pennsylvania. So, yeah, we had a bunch of fundraisers scheduled through the end of the year. And our regular buildings were down in Hollywood, Maryland, and in Joppa. So it was like 7 or 8 that we had to. There's nothing we can do. I mean, we put our next 2 shows at the end of May, hoping that we pushed it back to I think it's like May 29th and 30th or 30th and 31st. I can't remember off the top of my head, but that's like Joppa and Hollywood. And we're just hoping that we can get to a point where we could put them on, and then we talk about it now. Like yesterday I had to run up and I had to get like milk and eggs yesterday morning from Royal Farm, and this kind of hit me. So I was in the farm store and I was grabbing milk and eggs, and I grabbed a coffee, and it up on 43, and it was the first time it hit me because the line was all the way to the back of the store, but it was only like 10 people. And because everybody's standing 8 feet apart, and half of the people had gloves and masks on, and then there was one guy that had freaking goggles on, and a plastic shower cap, and gloves and a mask, and he had boot covers on. And I'm not mocking him. I get everybody has their own reasons, but I was just like, man, I was thinking how's this? How are we going to get back to normal?
Yeah, I think it'll be waves for sure.
Yeah.
But, you mentioned it's shutting you guys down. There's no revenue for you and Dennis. I'm sure that hurts you guys. Obviously. It's hurting everybody.
Yeah.
There's very few people exempt from this. But don't you care? I know this is how I feel a lot more about, your actual workers and your employees, and knowing that they depend on you for income. You kind of feel guilty. You let them down, even though it's out of your control. For a lot of these kids are 21, 22, 23-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And we'll get into the wrestling lifestyle in a bit, but they basically gambled their life on themselves.
Right.
Through you to provide a moderate means of income.
Right.
Hoping to be the 1% that makes it, right?
Right.
And now they're just sitting home, not knowing if their rent's due.
Yeah.
Not knowing if their student loans are due or not.
Yeah.
Just everything's so fluid. Have you been in contact with them? Have you had a talk with them?
Well, we have a student Facebook group, and Dennis and Nat and a lot of our trainers, they're doing stuff having them do post promos and stuff like that, things to kind of keep them, post promos, and let's post them, stay focused on, developing your characters or working on your characters and things like that. So just to kind of keep them. But I myself too, obviously how crazy this whole thing is I've been in the last week trying to completely, I moved because I do real estate, and real estate is where really a majority of my income that feeds my family and takes care of the bills and puts my daughter through school and everything. I had to move that whole office back to my home, and now she's doing homeschooling, and they're, because her school that she goes to is, just like everybody, they're switching to a, online platform to try to keep them educated. So I'm also being the a teacher, you know what I mean, helping her through the class, and so everything. So I feel like it just the days just go Like it just doesn't stop. You know what I mean? And it's so crazy. And
It's the Twilight Zone.
It's Twilight
Every
Zone,
day
yeah.
I wake up, I don't know which day it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like it was a bad dream, and then you realize that it's not. It's unprecedented. And, we had Justin on for the first episode. He compared it to our generation's 9/11, our generation's Vietnam. And I think that, leaders will emerge, and we will all adapt and overcome together. I think long term, it'll be a good thing. I think the country's fabric will really come to light a lot more than it has recently, and we'll be fine. We just got to help out those who need it the most right now.
Right.
So enough about Corona for now. Let's talk about your journey. You were an independent wrestler. You worked for WWE sometime. Probably best known for you're the guy that arrested Stone Cold Steve Austin on live national television
in the Garden. Yeah,
and just take us through a Cliff Notes version of your journey, how you made it to the WWE, and of course the night you put handcuffs on the Texas Rattlesnake.
So I guess that you classified. Jim Ross always classified and always called us journeymen, which is probably the best way. So I started training and wrestling, and I had my first match, which was interesting. One of the shows that got canceled was Kenwood High School in Essex. We had a fundraiser, and that's actually where I had my first match, November 14th, 1993. It was me. Like, you, as a wrestler, you always remember the date. It's 25 years later, you remember the date. So that was like one I was looking forward to, because we hadn't done a show, or I hadn't done a show. So I thought, for me, that was neat. Like, this is where I had my first match and broke into wrestling. So I trained locally, and then luckily I got I worked with Axel Rotten a lot when I was training, and he was a guy that was coming back from USWA and going into ECW, really starting to get a national name for himself. And me and this guy, Shane Shamrock, just basically Axel and Ian would come down the local school that we were at, and we were new and we didn't know anything, and they would beat us up, really just beat the shit out of us. And can I say that on here?
Yeah, man.
So
we're all family here.
He would beat the shit out of us, and we stayed, and we didn't know any better because we were just young and hungry. And then they kind of liked us, and they took us under their wing, and that's kind of helped me. That helped me get a little jump start, because Axel had a good name. His name was growing, and then I was like off and running and doing independent shows and traveling and meeting up and hooking up with promoters, and it was so much different back then because social media didn't exist. Like, it's just so crazy. And like back then you had to, in the early 1990s, like we had to get someone to film on. First of all, my family couldn't afford it. We had to find people that, like, not everybody had a VHS camera with the cassettes, and you could get and copy your matches. And then you had to put VHS tapes together and mail them to promoters. And you had to find ways like pro wrestling magazines, because you couldn't just Google or find all the different promoters everywhere and shoot them or tweet at them and tag you in a video. It was so much different. So I just hustled a lot back then and was hungry, and just got my name out there. And me and this guy, Chad Austin, that's local, we drove down to Smoky Mountain a couple times. And that's where I first met like Jim Cornette. It was just like a young, hungry guy just trying to get out. We just jumped in the car and like drove to Tennessee. And I met him, and Jim Cornette ultimately is a guy that ended up like helping me start to do like the doing jobs, as they called it, and doing extra work for WWE, because he was in charge of that. And he had just taken a liking to me, and he would get me booked, for extra stuff. And that's how all that started. And then once you do that for a while and they start to see you, then they're like, they know you're capable, or they have trust in you. And then they start using you for other stuff. And that's how I ended up. I had been there a bunch and done a bunch of stuff. And then they were, of course, that when they did the Garden, and they did that, it was obviously a big night, because that's the big moment where it's building up. They had been building up to for months. Finally, Stone Cold's going to lay the stunner on Vince. And it happened, you know what I mean? And I just happened to be in that position. But a funny side story is a joke is Chris Candido was there, and he wasn't working there. He was in ECW at the time, and Chris Candido is he's the most talented dude I was ever in the ring with, and just a freaking good human being, man. Just he was a good dude that was taken way too soon, and he offered so much to the wrestling business. Like so he was there, and Tammy Sonny was still, I think she was still working there, still working for Vince at the time, and Chris had. He was with ECW, so he wasn't like the Body Don anymore. But I made a joke with him because that was when the Monday Night Wars were building up, and like throughout the day, you get there early in the days, like 1 PM, and we laid this out, and then I tell Candido, I say, hey man, check this shit out. I said, and Chris, he'd get real worked up and be like, yeah. So I say, this is after I knew like I was going to be the one to like cuff Stone Cold, and after he stuns Vince, and Vince is going to be laying there, and I said, bro, look at this, and I had an NWO shirt in my bag. It's like I was just I was a kid. I had an NWO was hot, and I said, bro, I'm gonna fucking. Cool. I said when I said after we cuff Stone Cold and Vince is selling, I'm gonna freaking on live TV take my cop shirt off and have the NWO, and then the whole day, like Candido was like all worked up, like, oh, you got to do it. You got to like.
Bischoff would have been on the phone.
That's what he
would have given you a job.
That's
the next
what I was
day.
saying. I was saying like I could have the trajectory of my career could have completely been different at that moment. Like imagine, you know what I mean? I've always joked like, yeah, I could have just right after I cuff him, I could have. I tell the story, I elaborate it now and say, yeah, and after I had Stone Cold, I was going to turn him around and stun him. What's he going to do? He's cuffed. What's he going to do? So that was, yeah, but ultimately that was a really cool moment. It was cool to be part of it. You know, like I joke like I would have done it, but obviously I would have never had the balls to do it.
Yeah.
Because at that time you had like something like that. You had like Vader and Ken Shamrock and Steve Blackman in the locker room.
Yeah, you definitely want to go back to those. Yeah.
I would have done something like that, try to get myself a job. I had to walk through that locker room though.
Yeah. So you mentioned on Chris Candido's untimely passing. I think he would have had a birthday this past weekend. There's a dark side to the industry, and it's being highlighted right now more than ever through the show known as Dark Side of the Ring, and it's really just bringing to the national light what we as wrestling fans have always known about, but we didn't want to look at too much. These terrible stories, untimely deaths like Eddie Guerrero's, Chris Candido's, of course, something that almost brought the entire industry down. Chris Benoit, of course, murdering his son, murdering his wife, and then eventually taking his own life. Bruiser Brody being murdered. Owen Hart dying in the middle of the ring, and the show continuing to go on. What do you think moments like these have done to the public perception of wrestling overall? And where do you think we are right now as an industry? Do you think changes have been made? Because when I was watching Dark Side of the Ring, somebody, I forget who, mentioned that the farce was the WWE wellness policy in the beginning, but we've seen some pretty big names get popped, without naming them right here, multiple times. So they've got 2 strikes on them. But then there's also the skeptical person who says, well, a lot of these guys have never been popped, and they probably know when the test is coming.
So without a doubt, the industry's like, there's zero doubt in my mind, like it's changed and gotten better. Zero doubt. From someone that started in the early 1990s. Because it was like the Wild West back then. Not only the Wild West, but chaos, and there was no sense of it. Everybody was a rebel, and like what I mean by that, like no one. You know, we used to just frickin', especially in the ECW days, and when I was going in, another like a quick side story, just like how reckless it was. I mean, I did a job for Balls Mahoney in ECW, and it was like at the Golden Dome in Pittsburgh. It was a TV taping, and they were Balls was just going to start doing hardcore chair swinging freak. And it was going to be taped for TV. And like at that time, like, you know, he would just grab the steel chairs and it was just like, hey, I'm going to hit you as hard as I can. And whatever you do, don't put your hands up. Don't you dare block it. And you just didn't. You just fed your head, you know. And I was always fine with it because the same way when I swing a chair, like, don't you dare block it. Just take it, you know, like how dumb we were. But balls hit me so hard. And Jeff Jones, we like always joke about it still. Jeff Jones was the referee at the time. Balls hit me so hard with a chair that he knocked me out on my feet and I didn't go down. And then when I got in the back, like Paul Heyman and Rick Rude and Taz were like ripping into me because they thought they were like, they thought I was like no selling it. But he hit me so hard, he knocked me out on my feet and I was just standing there, and he ended up like hitting me again to take me down, so that I'd go down, and that's just kind of how it was then. There was no sense of safety. It really was like the Wild West, and it was like that everywhere. WWE, whatever. I mean, just look at like The Rock and Mankind when he did like 10 chair shots to the head like that. There was no protection. So it definitely has changed, like, not just the stuff with Benoit, but all the knowledge, everything that's come out about concussions. It's completely changed, and it's definitely a much safer industry and more health. I mean, even when we used to train back in the days and we trained people, you just got in there and just beat people up, and there was no sense of safety.
Anybody our age or anywhere close to our age has seen probably half of their heroes die. In their 30s, 40s, 50s. Guys like Mr. Perfect, guys like The Ultimate Warrior, Eddie Guerrero. I mean, that's got to mess with the performers as well, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When you're seeing not just, you know, your coworkers, but your brothers, because we'll get into the lifestyle of an average pro wrestler. To see, like, your brothers, who you're seeing more than your family, more than you're seeing your wife, more than you're seeing your kids, just drop dead like flies, right?
Right.
So was there a sense of, hey, Vince, you got to fix this, man, or I'm finding a new job?
No, I don't think that. I think the Benoit thing, because the Benoit thing happened. Remember, the Benoit thing happened right around the same time that that all of this information came out about concussions.
CTE.
The CTE.
So we didn't know what CTE was,
right?
And now you start seeing Benoit. You see Junior Seau,
right?
And we're not making excuses for everybody.
No,
right?
You're not. I'm not making an excuse for Benoit.
Think that these men had working brains is very naive, and it's a lie.
I'm not going to sit here and say I was friends with Benoit. I had met him about a dozen times, and had many conversations with him. You know, like Pep, he was a good dude. I mean, this is, you know, I'm not talking about what he did and ultimately how he left this world, but he was a guy that like he would go out. He came to me several times, like, give me a pep talk, you know what I mean? Like, he was a good dude, you know what I mean? So, you know, and he wasn't a friend. He was just kind of like a guy that he had gotten to know me, and he knew I was like one of Axel's guys, and he was a good dude. So I think that whole thing, when all that, I think it probably even woke Vince up to a certain extent that, like, you know what I mean? All the deaths, maybe they were like, oh, this guy's being careless, or he's taking too many pills, or this and that. But I think all of that happening, and this, you know, how big the issue came with concussions with the NFL, I think all that I think that woke Vince McMahon up to like, man, we got it. You know what I mean? There's a bigger picture here.
I mean, I think CTE and the chair shots and the hits to the head were probably just one part of the equation, right? Because you have the perception of steroid abuse in the industry too. Of course, painkillers, because let's get into this. The average life of a wrestler, you're probably on the road minimum 4 days a week, right?
Yeah, once you get going, you're making a career at it, yeah.
You're responsible for your own car. Mm-hmm. You're responsible for your own place to sleep, hotel.
Yeah, independent contractor.
Or a friend's house, right? And a lot of times, you don't know what town you're in. You don't know what you're going to have for lunch. You don't know what you're going to have for dinner. You just know that you got to be right here by this time, or else your job's in jeopardy, right?
Right. Yeah, so your spot, if you're, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you twist your ankle, if your back's hurting, and you lose your spot, there's no promise that you'll ever get that back. If you're not on TV, you're forgotten.
Yeah.
So talk about the pressure of having to perform every day? And do you think that there's still that pressure to perform every day even when you're hurt? Because number one, what happened with Benoit, and number two, and we'll get into this in a little bit, there's other streams of income now. There's competition.
Right. So I think there's – so a lot of the guys have guaranteed contracts now, which they didn't then. But I wouldn't say that pressure maybe like back then, maybe the pressure, way back then. And, until you get – if you get to – obviously there's like a certain level you get to in wrestling, like The Rock or John Cena or Hulk Hogan or, CM Punk, or you get to a certain guy where you're making millions, or like Roman Reigns now. Like he's good, because he's made so much and he's made so much of a name for himself that if he had to take 6 months off, 8 months off, he'd be fine coming back. But wrestling's a weird thing where until you get to that level of a star, you can be forgotten. It's really a weird thing. It's like you work up and you're like a mid-level guy, but until you really get that breakthrough to become that mega star, you are forgotten. But now guys, I would say, because of the guaranteed contracts, they might still have an income, but it may be more them. It may not be the WWE, but it may be them going, well, crap, man, like I was getting momentum. Like
Sure.
There's guys like,
No different from the NFL.
Right.
So if you come out and you're injured, if you're a quarterback, for example, and the backup goes in, there's no guarantee you're ever getting your spot back.
Right.
I mean,
Especially
Drew
if he starts
Bledsoe,
killing
Tom
it.
Brady, right?
Right.
So we touched on the dark side of the business. We touched on the daily lifestyle. Let's get into the positive side of it, and that is, how ingrained is pro wrestling into daily American culture? Because I feel that anytime I travel overseas, the insults are always go eat a hot dog, watch some baseball, and watch some wrestling.
Right.
And I guess while wrestling is becoming huge and has always been huge in places like Japan internationally, it's always going to be considered an American product, right? And
I think so, yeah.
look, we all know it's not real, or
Right.
it's scripted, or whatever word you want to use.
Predetermined, right.
What do you think makes it so ingrained in American culture? What aspects, what part of it make it so Americana?
I think people see themselves in a lot of the characters and in a lot of wrestling, and
Especially now with the women becoming more prominent.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I think people see themselves, and it is great, even though wrestling's a funny thing. It's a funny thing. Like I just had, and real estate, I don't really talk about wrestling a lot, like unless people know me from wrestling. And just the other day, but I'll get it happens like 50% of the time. Just the other day, last Friday, I had a settlement and sitting there, and we're talking and they're thanking and everything, and then they just bring up wrestling, and I'm like, okay, I've never had this conversation with them before, and they're like, yeah, we saw, like,
So they put the bait out. They put the bait out.
Yeah. And I said, yeah, and then we Googled, and then we started kind of diving down the hole, and we were like, wow. And I was like, yeah. So the reason is because like people see it in two different ways. They're either like, man, that's really cool that you did that, or like, that's freaking stupid. You know what I mean? But I think even a lot of people that I found that say that really stupid, I've had people like, that's kind of dumb. But then they start asking, more and more, the longer I know them, like more questions about it. Well, what about this? What about that?
My theory's always been, everybody watches wrestling. Not everybody admits it.
Right. So, and Jeff Jarrett used to have a good saying. I can't think of it. The saying was, to those that understand, you don't have to explain, but to those that, I can't know the saying. It's like to those that understand, you don't have to explain, but to those that need an explanation, I can't even remember. And if the Jeff Jarrett saying, but it's really good. It's basically like if you're, you know what I mean? Like if people that get it, like, you don't have to give an explanation to them, but, it's basically the same thing. I agree. I think a lot more people watch it than,
look, there's a reason why Fox is handing out billion-dollar contracts to WWE.
Yeah. And TNT giving AEW a chance.
Exactly. Which leads us into the next thing I want to talk about. Right now, with no live sports on, WWE and AEW, their competitor now, are the only forms of live entertainment. They're working in these empty arenas, but they're enjoying rating success because there's nothing else to watch, right? Unfortunately for WWE, their biggest event of the entire year, WrestleMania, who everybody at some point has watched a WrestleMania, whether you watched Hogan slamming Andre, Stone Cold fight The Rock, or more recent guys like Orton and Cena, you've watched a WrestleMania.
Right.
Well, now Vince is in a pickle, right? Because he can't have a full arena because of what's going on with the coronavirus. But WrestleMania is also his baby. So he's made the decision to make it a 2-day event next weekend. He'll have the entire country watching his product. But it won't be as grandiose, if you will. He won't have the fans, 100,000 fans often, scream at the top of their lungs. He won't be bolstering the local economy in Tampa for 3-4 days. He won't have all the independent workers working all these shows based around WrestleMania. Do you think Vince made the right call, or would you have delayed it? What would you have, put your Vince hat on, basically put your Roger Goodell hat on if you were in charge of the Super Bowl? Does the Super Bowl go on with no fans? Does WrestleMania go on with no fans? Or do we just wait?
I mean, I would have waited if it was any other pay-per-view. Again, I mean, obviously Vince, he's Vince, and who am I to judge him? But if it was any other pay-per-view but WrestleMania, I would say go on. But it's WrestleMania. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe in his mind, WrestleMania is always that flagship, just like the Super Bowl, just like the World Series, the Stanley Cup. So, history's always going to, it's always going to be in that history books is 100,000 people, 70,000 people, you know what I mean? 90,000 people, nobody. You know what I mean? It's going to always, I don't know, man. I would have delayed it and I would have just put something else
like
on.
You say, I'm nobody to doubt Vince. He's proven himself to be a master promoter over decades. I just would have done a Wrestle Aid, for example, and had the same matches and pushed WrestleMania itself into June, maybe a smaller venue, a historic venue like the Garden or Vegas. But it is what it is. Next weekend, for 2 days, the country will be able to watch together WrestleMania. I wouldn't be surprised to see it go on Fox or another major network rather than just a WWE network. And maybe that's what we need right now.
Right.
I've gone back and forth on this matter. I'll be watching. I'm thankful.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people that haven't watched wrestling for a long time will be watching, will be thankful. And maybe his ultimate goal right now is to get new eyes on the product because there's competition now.
Right. And maybe that's what he's doing. Maybe it's just, I don't know. I would, it's going to be tough. I haven't even I've watched very little bit of the empty arena wrestling just because it's tough for me to, I do think AEW is doing a little bit better job.
So let's talk about AEW. For those listening that aren't familiar, AEW is started by somebody who, by all accounts, has more money than Vince, has a passion for wrestling, got a couple hot names together, and they're really making an impact in a very short period of time on TNT, nationally broadcast, and it's a much different product. It caters to the fans, the hardcore fans, the 5%, if you will, a lot more than Vince, who publicly traded company, PG product, worries about having kids in the seats, right? Where do you see the future of this business going? Because I've gone back and forth on what I think it's going to look like, and it's very uncertain right now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is uncertain. But I think AEW's. Well, I think it's good for the wrestling economy. Well, right now the wrestling economy has suffered just like the regular economy. But I think it's good for the industry, the competition. I think competition's always good, and I got a lot of friends in AEW that have jobs, so I'm grateful for them. And I think one of the reasons they're doing it differently is because it's it might be Tony Khan calling the shots and like Cody and the Bucks, but they allow input from everybody, from all the wrestlers. And WWE used to be that way. I'd always hear like back in the Attitude Era day and all, a lot of the wrestlers had their own input. They didn't have as many writers. The Rock and those guys and Triple H back, they used to, kind of improv a lot of their own stuff. And that was some of the best stuff. Like, I think, there's so many creative guys and talented guys. I think that's one of the guys and girls. I think that's one of the reasons that AEW is having success because they're very open-minded, apparently, from taking advice from, input from everybody.
And when you do take advice and input from your coworkers and your employees, all of a sudden they have so much more pride and investment in the product, right? Because
they're emotionally
when I go to my
invested,
staff and I say, hey, give me 3-4 new drinks, and they come up with the drinks, all of a sudden now they really want to make sure these drinks get served to the customers, right? Because that's their baby.
Right.
So a wrestler who says, that was my idea, that's my baby, they're performing that much harder because they want to shine.
Right.
They want to stick their chest out and say, hey, man, I thought of that. And I think you're right on that. You're not having TV writers, and I don't know which way the future of the business is going to go. What I see happening ultimately is WWE will, of course, never go away. It'll always be there, family-friendly. It's going to be higher rated. But I think that AEW is going to be there for the hardcore fan. And I think that both companies at some point will agree that they're not really fighting over the same audience. And I think at some point they're going to start working together a little bit too.
We'll see. It'll be interesting.
It will be.
Yeah.
Dan, talk about some of the names that you've put out from your school. You were very humble earlier with talking about your program there, but in a really short period of time, you're nationally recognized. Ring of Honor has taken you as a dojo, and you've put out some huge names in the industry in a really short period of time. So just touch on that a little bit.
So Leo Rush, Velveteen Dream, Jessica Carr, who's the referee, Derek Moore, who's been there for a couple of years refereeing, Orlando Jordan, a long list going back to like Mickey James when we had our school initially in like the late 90s through the early 2000s, and we kind of closed the school down for about 10 years and then opened it back up. But I've had a lot of influence on like Lita. And to me, having those people, like, to me, for me, Lita, when she got inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2014, and the first person she thanked publicly, like in her Hall of Fame speech, was me. So that was pretty awesome, things like that. Wrestling's different. I've always had people, people say to me over the years, like, do you ever get anything residuals or anything like that when people make it? And I'm like, I know like people have done that in the wrestling business. I've never done it. I never had any interest. For me, when Lita got up there and at the WWE and was getting inducted into the Hall of Fame and names me personally as the first person she thanks, like, that was worth $1 million to me. You know what I mean?
Like watching your kid grow up, right?
Yeah, and thank me. At that point, at that moment, probably the most important moment of her career. So, like, that kind of stuff it's cool, and it's,
And the MCW promotion itself, I've been to probably dozens of shows at this point. It's a phenomenal product. If you're watching, if you're listening, and you haven't been to one, it is by far the best family entertainment you can get for the dollar in the state of Maryland. You guys take a lot of pride in your craft. You take a lot of pride in your cleanliness. You take a lot of pride in having a family product that I can bring, my nephews or my kids or what be it to. Without a doubt, a lot of your hardcore fans, and you have a lot of them, we see a lot of the same fans, front row, second row, third row at all the shows, are listening right now or watching. They're missing it.
Yeah.
So, if you could say one thing to them right now, what would it be?
I'd say hang tight. We're all in this together, and when we're able to put if we can do May 30th in Joppa and May 30th and 31st, I think, Joppa and Hollywood, we're gonna come back with two big ass shows, and we're gonna have some good shows back. So just hang in there. We're all in this together, and we're all itching to kind of get past this and get back to life.
Yeah, of course. And finally, we'd be foolish if we didn't talk about the Bruiser, right?
Right, absolutely.
So RJ Meyer, a very good friend of yours, very good friend of mine, probably a mentor to both of us, I would say.
Yeah, RJ was when I first went into in 1997, 98, and I was like, I want to open up a wrestling school. I want to teach people how to do it. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. And again, you didn't have the internet or way to get it out of there, but handed out flyers at the arena, and me and my partner back then at the time, Mark Schrader, and we just did as much as we could to get promotion for a couple months. We were going to open up this pro wrestling school to teach you how to be a pro wrestler. RJ was the first guy that knocked on the door and just blindly. We always joke about it to this day. Like we were so struggling because we were in our young 20s we didn't tell this, but when we opened up, we had borrowed a ring for tryouts. So on the first day the school opened up, the guy needed his ring for a show that weekend. So to this day, RJ comes in with about 6 other people over the course of the next 2 days that signed up to start, but RJ was the first one. And he's got like $2,000 in cash, but there's no ring in the building. And I was like, trust me, we're getting one. We didn't want to tell anybody at the time. We just couldn't afford one yet. We were using that money to try to buy our own ring. But he's been there and been with me that long, all the way back, literally from day one.
Yeah, and he's done everything. He set up the rings. He's taught every student. He's achieved a great deal of success. But unfortunately, he's in one hell of a fight right now with cancer. And second round. You probably know the details a little more than me, so let's let everybody know that, what he's going through right now.
So he basically, the leukemia came back. He had the bone marrow transplant.
Young guy in great shape.
Yeah, young guy in great shape. Yeah, 40 years old. In phenomenal shape, just amazing shape. And he had the bone marrow transplant. And from the brief explanation, because I don't understand the cancer and all this stuff, and it's kind of as he's told me and talked to me about it, it's like it was mind blowing. But I guess the stem cells. I guess the bone marrow didn't have a chance to take, and the mutation, the leukemia mutated, and came back. So he ended up having to go back in for more rounds of chemo. And as of the other day, he's okay. He's everything. His count's coming up, so he's got to go back to do a booster now. He has to go in for another round of chemo. And then if that's all clear, then he can do another. They can boost. I guess they boost the bone marrow, and then hopefully that takes. And we're all.
Yeah.
And he's
been fighting this for over a year now.
Yeah,
right.
A year now.
It just came out of nowhere.
He's
the heart and soul of
MCW. He is the heart. Yeah, he's the heart of it. He runs the school. He runs the school, the birthday parties, and Tara. He works with Tara, and they run the parties. He books the shows with Dean. I mean, it really is the backbone and he's become the backbone and cornerstone of MCW for sure.
On top of having a full-time job as an electrician, which he obviously can't do right now, on top of being a father, I mean, the guy is just in a struggle that none of us would ever wish upon our worst enemy. We're obviously bringing this to light right now because, unfortunately, the guy needs money. It is what it is. He's in the fight of his life, and he has no income.
Yeah, had another bull roast. We were gonna,
and we'll get to that when things get back to normal. But if you're watching, if you're listening, we will link his GoFundMe to this interview. Every dollar counts. $5, $10. Just, if nothing else, for his family. We've all done as much as we can, and we will continue to. We love RJ. So if you can help, I'd be very appreciative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dan would be very appreciative. I'm sure I can speak for you on that. But RJ, if you're listening, man. We love you. We've told you that a lot over the past year or so, but you mean a lot to us. You mean a lot more than we tell you because we're guys and we don't let our feelings get in the way. But we're watching you fight, and you're very inspirational, brother. Yeah, you'll make it out. We have 100% faith in that. Just follow God, and you'll be all right. Well, Dan, I think that touches everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate you coming down.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Everybody give it up for Dimitri, who is, just busting his ass to get this thing up and running. We got it going with no logo. We have a logo now. He's got it on every major platform, Spotify, iTunes. He's doing behind-the-scenes stuff nonstop that I don't even know how to begin to wrap my head around, but somehow we're on the top 100 on some chart. He's very proud of that.
That's awesome, right?
He's putting everything he has into this. Of course, we'll link his profiles to everything we can. So make sure you guys, while you see my ugly face here behind the camera, show some love for Dimitri, and we'll get this thing rolling, man. I hope you guys are having a good time listening. We're having a fun time making it happen, and we're going to have some great guests just continuing to roll in, and then let's have some fun. Hopefully we get back to normal soon, and we can only do one episode every week or every other week because I'll be back over there slinging crabs. All right, guys. that does it for episode 3. RJ, this one's for you, brother.